Hey everybody, welcome to Social Deviance. Today we have another wonderful, terribly wonderful subject called family violence. And you have to kind of make sure you stay positive here because some of these things can be very difficult subjects to talk about as your um, book starts out with a scenario where the man um, jams a cell phone down a woman's throat, nearly kills her. And the little picture here on our PowerPoint shows a little boy holding up his mom's shirt to find the bruise where she's been beaten. And so we have to look at this thing in terms of what is family violence and what is the deviance that occurs in the process of that. So we're going to look at the myths. I'm not going to read all that. I won't buy that. Let's go down here. Okay, start out with the myths. The myth about family violence is the poor only. It's found violence is more likely to occur in blue-collar families than white-collar. But this only means that the percentage of violent blue-collar families is higher than the percentage of violent white-collar families. As for the percentage of violent blue-collar families, it is far less than 50%, which means that only a minority of such families are violent. Violence and love cannot happen together. That's a lie. It's a myth. People that use violence to discipline their children still love. Men may still love their children. They do. Many people that use spanking which is violence. Not necessarily. I'm not saying it's deviant. I'm just saying they still love their children, and many husbands still love their wives, even though they sometimes lose it and beat their wives. They're showing true remorse afterwards. Most abused children grow up to be abusive parents. I was looking for the answer to that actually because I wanted to read it directly, but somehow it's out of order in the book. Let's see. Parents often resort to violence as a way of punishing their misbehaving children. Well, that's about the love. Let's see. Let's see, like grapes. I don't see the part about the children on here. I'm going to pause this for a moment. And I was going to say from my own experience, most people who are abused as children do not become abused. If that's from only a very small slice of the population that I've worked with. I've seen far more victims, of course, because those are the people that come in for help. Many times people that perpetrate the violence, unless I'm in a court-ordered or a probationary type situation, I'm not going to see very many of them because they're not going to admit it unless they're caught. But most of the children, majority, 70% of child abuse victims do not grow up to abuse their own children. Okay, so alcohol and drugs are involved in most family violence. I think we've talked about this before as far as people using the excuse that they were drunk when they did it. Heavy drinking does play a role in family violence because husbands who drink heavily are nearly 3 times more likely than their non-drinking peers to beat their wives. But heavy drinking is not the real cause of wife abuse. So there. Take that, put that in your pipe, and don't smoke it. Don't inhale. Outline the extent of family violence in society today, the objective. The extent of family violence varies from one research report to another. Some of the research into family violence, physical and sexual violence that's severe enough to cause injury, shows that as many as 14% of wives experience marital rape, and 33% of wives experience beatings. 4% of children experience child abuse, and 2% of the elderly are abused. So, and it's hard, again, this is a difficult thing to measure because we don't know how much goes unreported. I mean, we can guess, but it's a guess. It can be an educated guess, and there's ways to come up with algorithms that would guess that out probably pretty accurately, but there could always be inaccuracies in that. I don't know why I keep getting my button off there. There we go. And then we come to the subject we were actually talking about that last time, marital rape. Obviously, it's raping of the wife by the husband, and the most prevalent form of forced sex. It involves about 14%, is what we said. Most of this involves the use of physical force, which means obviously there's injury involved. So it's not just a sexual act at all. It's forced. Also, forced anal rape occurs more often than vaginal rapes. And marital rape is as traumatic to the victim as stranger rape is. So the levels of trauma that are experienced by anyone, even if it's married, is just as high as if a stranger had broken into the house and did it. Now, I'm going to tell you something I tell my marriage and family therapy people, is that anal sex, anal intercourse, there is no such normal. There's a difference between consensual and rape, but consensual is still not normal. As one of the doctors that my daughter worked with said, that there's only the poop chute is designed for one thing, to expel poop from our body. It's not meant to have anything inserted into it. And anyone who does that, no matter how careful you are, will damage another person. And that is anti-biblical, because you're never to hurt other people intentionally. And even if you do it unintentionally, now I ruined it. So anyone who tries to tell you, ladies, that anal rape is normal is a liar. And it's pornographic, and that is my PhD opinion on it. I'm not saying that I have maybe there's another side to it that I haven't considered, but there's just no way for that to be normal. But anal rape, forced rape, it's more likely to be anal intercourse, penetration. Most offenders assume that they are entitled to have sex with their wives, whether the spouses want to or not. And there's 3 causes. The fact of anal rape is more common than stranger rape, obviously, because the victim is readily available and again, with the husband's sense of entitlement, is easier to is like more likely to happen that way. But it's still obviously rape. And you guys weren't around, but I remember the Bobbitt case that's written about in your book. Her husband she said, was raping her, and when he went to sleep, she cut off his penis. That might be a surprise that most people would not want to wake up to. Excuse me, there's 3 causes. The first one is the belief that is a sexist belief that the husbands are entitled, obviously, and that's the one we've already mentioned, entitled, because it's his wife, so he's entitled to it. Let's see if there's. And then the second cause of marital rape is the husband's attempt to punish the wife for what he considers unfaithfulness or any other perceived sin, quote unquote. The one that in the book that it was discussing said that the wife reported that he would punish her regularly for being unfaithful to him at some point, and punished him. Another one punished her getting pregnant to punish her for embarrassing him by getting pregnant. The third case of marital rape is the husband's attempt to use rape as a form of control over the wife. So that's where it's typically a way to get her to acquiesce to other things as well. So to be in his control and a sense of control over the wife. So the nature of woman abuse is that one aspect of it could be or would be that the man wants to have sex with his wife and she's not going for it, and so he tries to force her and uses physical force to make it happen. And many times they'll have serious injury, including bruising, marks on their throat, that kind of thing. Threats of physical harm as well, and threats of having sex outside the marriage if they don't have their forced sexual come-ons. And then the majority of married rapes do not involve vaginal penetration. Vaginal rapes account for less than half. So that's the way that goes. And forced anal intercourse occurs slightly more than often. And other forms of extremely degrading rapes in marriage include inserting objects into the wife's private parts, coercing her to have sex in front of children, or forcing sex on her soon after she is discharged from a hospital, usually after giving birth. Offenders assume they're entitled to have sex with their wives, and that's why they want to or not. But marital rape is as traumatic to the victim as stranger rape, striking tremendous fear into the raped wife, even if she leaves. So she's afraid he'll still come after her. So that's why don't they leave? Because they're afraid. They become battered wife syndrome is really about being conditioned to just give up. So it's similar to any other kind of torture. If you're good at it, quote unquote, good at torture, you can condition a person or an animal of any kind. A human being is at the bottom in our our lowest state. We're an animal who actually has choice. But we can be conditioned to ignore the choice or not, to even forget we have a choice or be too scared to make any other choice. One of the aspects of women abuse is a patriarchal society where men, and I'm talking about a sick patriarchal society. See, patriarchal society isn't evil to me. It just means that what they're actually talking about is a patriarchal society that's deviant. Deviant patriarchy says that you can do anything you want to a woman because she's a woman. Where if you read the words of Christ, he said, men are to treat women as Christ treated the church. In other words, we're to die for our wives. And just because, and actually what he's saying is not that wives have to submit to their husbands, but wives and husbands submit to one another. There's no unequalness to it. It's simply that we are giving our lives to one another, and we become, we're, that God made us to become one for one another. In other words, it's designed, marriage is designed to help me conform to my wife's wishes, and she's to conform to my wishes. And those wishes need to be healthy. And if they're not, then that needs to be worked out. And that's what marriage is all about. It's what any kind of serious relationship is all about. We have to work out our differences and learn to live together in spite of the differences. And so patriarchy, where there's ownership of one patriarchy, where ownership of a man over a woman is a cause of can be a cause of women abuse in that sense. The nature of child abuse, and again, I remind you that you need to do something good when you get done reading this stuff, because it's sickening. And you all know that we're all very much more aware of child abuse now, and all forms of abuse, than we used to be. Went back in the old days, it just wasn't talked about, and I don't think it was as prevalent. I think we're living in a permissive society that allows pornography to be shown openly on the air, and many children are not protected from that. And one of the types of child abuse that is now recognized by a lot of people, including myself, is exhibitionism or exposure to pornography. And you all know from my story, I believe that I've told you that I was exposed to, I was thinking the other day, it might have been as early as 11, exposed to rampant amounts of pornography at my brother's, my brother went to college, and my brother-in-law. And they were college young men, and at the time, Playboy and Penthouse, all those magazines, there wasn't an internet, so at least we didn't have access to an internet, but they had access to plenty of magazines and print pornography, and it wasn't just pictures as well. It was also reading the stories. I was an avid reader, and I would read the letters to Madam in the Penthouse magazine. It was a Dear Abby uh, article for pornography, and these people would write in. Supposedly, these people were writing in. There's Tebow. Supposedly, these people were writing in, telling about their exploits that they had with some woman or some man. It'd be both men and women writing and talking about these extraordinary experiences of sexual acting out. And those I found as a child were more damaging, affected me more strongly than the pictures themselves. The pictures obviously did, but those stayed with me to the point that some of my I would think about over and over again. And so exposure to that, exposure in families uh, by fathers and mothers, different forms of sexual abuse. Sometimes it can be direct physical contact, but other times it can be inappropriate, just inappropriate exposure. When you're not ready for it, does damage to the psyche, to our psychological makeup. And so that's part of it for me, just from a personal experience. Um, the book talks about, I believe, the let me think. I think it's 11.2% at the hands of an adult perpetrator is the level of sexual abuse or assault that any child or a female can go through. I think up to age 17, and then 5.1% for all male children are abused. And that's, even though that's much lower, it's really, you think about it, 5%, that's a lot of kids. And even if it's one kid, it's too many. We can't really report this in the form of statistics, other than to just for that to give us more impetus to actually act and do something about it. Um, Even without considering the fact, the book says here, even without considering the fact that most professionals consider it to be notoriously underreported, 1.9% of all boys in the United States is an enormous number of victims. Based on census reports, the number of males of all ages up to 18, that would mean that more than 750,000 boys have been victims of adult perpetrators. For girls, they found a dramatic increase in the victimization between ages of 15 and 17, from 16.8% to 26.6%. In other words, without considering underreporting, at least 10% of all American girls are sexually victimized or assaulted between the ages of 15 and 17. Now you tell me, does that have an effect in our culture, in our ability to have a healthy society, healthy community? This is a major problem, and it's not going away real soon, because what does happen is some children, not all, and like it said, it's a myth that all children that are abused end up becoming abusers, but some do. And some are not just abused once, they're abused over and over and over again. And those kids are much more likely to remain victims, or to remain victims or become abusers. Um, uh, Most cases of incest involve, it has been known in the past that most cases of incest involve fathers as offenders and daughters as victims, stepfathers being more likely than biological fathers. Um, However, more recent years, virtually all researchers have found that sibling sexual abuse is much more common. And I found this to be true in the group of people that I worked with around attachment disorder. It's used, and I worked with a boys' home where almost all of the boys in that home had been convicted or arrested for sexual abuse of a younger sibling or cousin, some family member, and so they had access to the family, and they had also been abused themselves. So they were part of the group that you would say, quote unquote, they didn't grow up to become abusers, but they did abuse other kids in the process of growing up. Because think about it. Well, how's a kid going to react to something like that? If grandpa uh, has sexually abused the mom, the sister, the maybe another sister, and the little boy, and we don't know how many other people, but the little boy had been sexually abused over and over again, and then he acts out on his cousins. Who could who would not predict that had to happen? He's not going to know how to stop. And the sad thing about sexual abuse is, and I don't want to, the sad thing about it is that sex comes along with a good feeling. There's a certain amount of, obviously it feels, part of it feels good, even if it was violent, and I want to have a relationship with this person. This person tends to be a father or a grandfather. Even if it hurts the child physically, the child wants to have that relationship. It's like all attachment disorder kids, no matter how badly they're abused, deep down, I mean, they all express this. They all want to go back to their moms, the people that abused them, because they know it's not normal, so they're hoping that it will be. I mean, that's my simplistic answer to it. It's much more complex than that. But they still want to be with that adult. And so it doesn't matter. And I've had kids that were sold by their parents for prostitution because they were drug addicts. They would sell their child to get drugs, to get drug money. And so they would sell their kid out. And those kinds of those things do things to to people, okay? But it doesn't change the fact that they want to be with their that parent. They may be really enraged at that parent, but they still want to be with them. They want them to correct it. They want that to be, they want to have that correct relationship with their parent. They want to have a corrected relationship. So that's why with a lot of these kids when they're adopted, I mean not all of them, but the specific ones I worked with, the ones that were, they would struggle with um, bonding with anybody for that matter, but bonding with an adopted parent, for one thing, the rage would come out on the adopted parent, and um, they wouldn't be getting what they wanted. They wouldn't be getting their parent back, and so they wouldn't, and they would feel like they were doing something against their parent. It's so horrible what this stuff does to people. Uh, my, my arrow got off again. Okay. There's causes, and I've been listing some of the causes of child abuse. Some of the causal factors, you can read the book, which ones that I might leave out, but one of the causal factors is that obviously children who have been abused as a child, adults that have been abused as a child are more likely. They're about 30% of them are likely to abuse their children or grow up to abuse children. Uh, but it's important to remember that 70% um, do not grow up to become abusers. So that's the good news. The bad news is 30% is a heck of a lot of people. Um, then the other thing that's a causal factor is the sociological learned behavior. In other words, if I grow up in a family where I'm told that, go get the switch or go get the belt or go get the stick is a normal way to handle misbehavior, or if I watch my dad hit my mom or my brother hit my sister and it's tolerated, that is a learned behavior. That is a culture of violence that's been passed on in another way. Um, Another factor is the acceptance of the popular view that physical punishment is a proper way to discipline children. And I'm not saying that physical punishment is always abuse, but it's more likely to lead to abuse. In other words, if you're already swinging a weapon, a tool, or a hand at the child and you don't have your emotions under control. There used to be a book, well, there is a book called Dare to Discipline. And in that book, the author recommends that you spank your child, but you don't do it immediately. You do it after the fact. So in other words, you wait until everybody's calmed down, and it's a very structured activity where the child comes and volunteers to be spanked, and is given a certain number of swats, and that's over then. And but the parent cannot be angry when that happens. Well, I tried that. I tried doing it this way because my wife and I, when we were first married, we had no idea what to do, and so we followed Dare Discipline because we're Christians, and this was a Christian author, and so we. But what I found is, how do you? It's pretty hard not to be angry and to spank your child. You really need to do it before it gets too far, and that's hard to do. And then to not be angry when you do it. Good luck with that. So it's more likely to you're producing an atmosphere where violence. Um, and the others include poverty, unemployment, and family problems or lack of education. So all those are aspects of abuse. I don't know why I have to keep clicking on this to keep this going. Then oh yeah, here's another really positive and uplifting subject: female genital mutilation. It's euphemistically called female circumcision, Female genital mutilation involves cutting off some of the female genitalia, such as the clitoris or its foreskin or the labia. Why? Because there's since the idea in certain cultures is that women will act out and not be faithful to try to get a good feeling from having sex instead of doing it out of duty. And so mutilation is done in order to prevent them from enjoying the sexual act. It's it's the sickest thing I've probably ever thought of. Well, maybe not the sickest. There's a lot of sick stuff out there. You can actually read about that in your textbook, but the reasons are cultural belief. Genital mutilation is culturally acceptable in some societies, especially Muslim type religion societies, and it's but the one of the horrors of it is is mostly done without any kind of anesthetic. I don't know if that's something you can um, look at, can imagine. I can't. I can't even think about it. Um, there's a cultural belief in some sense that some cultures believe it's more pleasing to look upon sexually mutilated woman's parts. I can't believe I'm saying this. And then the second reason is that it's got a high social value, the high social value of virginity and marriageability. So if I've had this done, it makes me more marriageable, makes me a better, more marketable, so to speak. So to speak. I don't know if that's even so to speak. It's sort of like you are property in these cultures. Women are. Third reason is reward of social and psychological benefits. So your mama approves of it, daddy approves of it, and you do it, even though you don't want to. It's just, I don't know. It's something you can't. It's hard for me to imagine doing that to my daughters. Elder abuse is a come to light more recently. I think it's probably been around all the time, but part of this I think is due to the post the post culture, the post family oriented culture where it used to be that the wife would stay home and take care of the kids, and the husband could work, and that paid enough that you could actually make a living. You could pay for the rent. Oh, there's Trooper. Hi, Trooper. Trooper's a sausage dog. Hang on a minute. You have to see Trooper. He is a funny looking dog. Poor old Trooper. He's about 15, 20 years old. I don't know. And Trooper, look up here. He's deaf. Trooper, psst, look up here. Oh, he's cleaning up snacks that have dropped on the floor. Trooper. And I call him the lawn sausage because he's a tubular little animal with the biggest ears you ever seen. If I could get him to look up here. Trooper, come on up here. Show everybody how weird you look. You're just a good boy, though, aren't you? Yes, he's a good dog. He's a good old boy. Yeah. Hope that. I have to do something to make it feel better after talking about this stuff. Okay. So, elder abuse often appears in the form of neglect, emotional abuse, and financial exploitation or physical abuse. And part of the problem here is that sometimes elderly, just like children or very, very young children, cannot communicate what's going on with them, or they're afraid to communicate what's going on with them because it may be a caretaker, it may not be a family member. But the sandwich generation is what I'm talking about. Is that we put our family members into institutions where they're more likely to be abused, probably, because the people taking care of them are not. You can't buy love. You can't buy caring. So no matter how much I pay them, they know they can, their baser tendencies are exposed, and they don't have to take care of the person, so they neglect them, or they simply don't have that personal relationship. Now, there's family members that are the same way, so I'm not just beating up on. There's really good elderly care people, and there's people because they do care. See, they don't do it because they get paid a lot, that's for sure. They do it because they love elderly people and they're not about to hurt them. But then there's other people who are just doing a job. Okay, they do not have the investment in the person as a human being. And so I showed my senior seminar class a video I might post for you that shows how they made a daycare center in the same place as the elder care center, and it's separated by a glass wall. But they also bring the kids over in the morning and have them do daycare with the elderly people, and it's just the sweetest thing you can imagine. These children and this elderly uh, interacting with supervision, of course, because I mean, they're elderly people are still people, and we have to make sure that kids are safe. But that's very easy to do as long as people, and it's very inspiring. And I think what it does is it also promotes care for the elderly because we see that they're human beings and they come out of their shells. Um, so, this idea that we dehumanize people and put them in institutions. I'm getting really dry throat. May have to go get a drink here, but I'm gonna try to get through this. Social profile of many family abusers. So, the age of family abusers, young husbands and parents, those under the age of 30 are more likely than older ones to assault wives and abuse children. And it may not reflect the greater tendency among young men to commit violence in general. So, in other words, nobody knows for sure. We just know that it happens more often. And again, remember the curve, that research statistical curve. There's all kinds of exceptions to those rules, but we look at it in order to get a picture, at least in that sense. You can make different sets of research data to make different curves, but it still doesn't tell you what's really going on. It just gives you statistical where people fall within a statistical set of parameters. The family class is the family violence runs across all income levels, and what I like to say is that many times it's covered up in families of wealth, because in wealth you can afford it. You can afford to have people, and you may have people taking care of elderly who would not necessarily not be managed any better than the people in the nursing home that doesn't pay them enough to attract people. And the only good help are people that really just care about elderly people. Um, the class, okay, and then the gender. At home, men are more likely than women to inflict serious injury. For children, women are slightly more likely than men to be the offenders, but men still dole out the worst damage, so the more physical damage. Women are more likely to neglect, while men are more likely to be violent. And so their response, and also women have more accessibility and are more stressed because they tend to have more responsibility for childcare. This is also true for elder care. Women tend to be the ones that are given the responsibility, even though they might be in a nursing home. The woman is the one that may not be there often enough to protect the elderly person from abuse, to notice it. Stressful life. Well, yeah, I think so. Um, the more stress you have in your life, the more likely you are to abuse someone. That's duh. I don't think we needed to have a research project on that, but anyway. And then social isolation, what I talked about, where we used to have small communities where everybody knew each other, and that put a limit on some of the behaviors. And if I know what's going on over in my neighbor's house, I'm more likely, and I know my neighbor well, I'm more likely to knock on the door to interrupt things. I'm maybe not as scared if I hear that going on next door. In some of my big cities, I might not have that desire to put myself at risk because they don't know me and I don't know them, and they're gonna, that's gonna be a violation of some kind of particular rule that they may have in our isolated community. Feminism on family violence. It still takes. There's still family violence, no matter how well we've tried to alter the fact that women. We moved with feminism. The healthy part of feminism moved women from property to being seen as human beings. Um, but family violence does occur more often in developing countries, most likely because in developing countries you have a more patriarchal society. It tends to be more patriarchal, and within that patriarchy, there are men who abuse women, and if you give people absolute power, what does it do? You should be shouting corrupts absolutely. So absolute power corrupts absolutely. If you don't have a check and balance system, then that's what Jesus actually gave to people when he came along. He said that he gave women the right to be uh, treated as equals. No matter what anyone says, Christianity was the most feminist organization that ever came along and still is, because unless it's abuse, it's just like any other organization or any other set of rules. You can abuse them. You can avoid some rules and follow others. And you read one thing out of the Bible, you take one line out of the Bible without reading the next line, and the next line is what modifies the first line. So the fact is that in a marital relationship, Jesus said you both are to conform to one another. Even if the man is the quote head of the household, he dies for his wife. He dies for his family. He sacrifices his whole life in order to be with her, and she sacrifices her whole life in order to be with him. And they work together in sacrificial love. Well, the problem is people don't do that. And what did the Apostle Paul said? You're better off not to be married, because the fact is that it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. And someday I'll tell you my wife and I maybe will come in and tell you our story, because there's a lot of deviance in our story. Okay, on my part especially, but you can see the consequences. Um, Theories of family violence. Obviously, social learning theory, where we learn it from our parents. We learn it from a cultural violence in the home. Stress theory. The more stress that you experience, the less ability you have to limit it. And exchange theory is or conflict theory. It's the Marxist theory that, uh, based on Marxism, that you're basically exchanging one set of rules for another. Exchange theory says that the benefits outweigh the costs. So when there's no consequence for the violent behavior, for the abuse, where I feel like I get a sense of control, or I get to have quote unquote sex. I wouldn't even call it sex. Violently relieve myself with using my body as a tool, violent tool, and I feel a sense of control. And there's nothing there, there's no payment other than the consequences are less than the payment. That's the theory. So, and what you get out of it. So if you're exchanging, it's like buying or consuming something. This thing's driving me crazy. We're about done. We're on 18 of 20. Social responses to family violence. Protecting women, marital rape and battery. All states have laws against marital rape and places to seek protection. So as we've become more aware of how bad this whole thing is, we've created safe houses for women, and we've created laws, especially for violent men, and requirements for treatment in order for people that want to, still want to work it out and stop it. I mean, we're not talking about the major forms where people are being killed, but there really isn't. Most of the time, there's no working it out. It's mostly you just have to get out because people are unwilling to face how bad they've done it to other people. They're unwilling to face the consequences and the reality of it. Um, and the ultimately, we just try to protect children too with child abuse, um, and being witness to violence against their parent, their mothers or their fathers. In some rare cases, their fathers, but the watching the human being that takes care of you being abused is very much an effect, can have an effect later on in your life, obviously, and then can also lead to abuse of you because it increases the stress level in the family, and that's the stress theory. But um, I think that actually makes sense. The stress theory does make sense. And trying to protect children with laws against violence against them. There are some people that believe that children are, well, in essence, in the family kind of legal system, you do own, quote unquote, own your children, and you are a family. You have the right to raise your children the way you believe is true, but we have to find ways to say this is absolutely wrong if it's wrong, and this is your choice, and the consequence of doing it wrong is that you give up your choice to have how your children are raised, and they're taken away from you. Hopefully, in many cases, they're taken away temporarily because maybe the family is just if in the stress theory, the family may be under extreme stress and need just a timeout and help support to help out of poverty. That's why I have contributed and volunteered for building bridges out of poverty, because I really believe if we help people get out of poverty, then we're going to lower these cases of abuse and many of the social ills and deviant behavior that we are experiencing now as a society. And then, of course, protecting elders. One of the things we've done in Oklahoma is there's a organization here that they don't call them mentors, but I'm not thinking of the word right now. But they ask people to volunteer. They train you, and you go into nursing facilities or into these homes, mostly nursing facilities, and you are an ombudsman, OMBUDSMAN, ombudsman. And what you do as an ombudsman is you are there to represent. You're there as a diplomat, essentially, to represent the people that live in that home. And you visit with them. You go into the home, I think it's once a month. You're asked to do at least once a month. And you talk to people in the home. People are willing to talk to you. You talk to them. You ask them how they're doing. You ask them if they're pleased with the facility. And you listen to their complaints. And you decide whether or not those people are being treated well. And then you write a report about your visit. And if they're not being treated well, you are responsible to report it. And whatever they tell you is in this case in the state of Oklahoma is absolutely your confidential. So even a court of law can't force you to tell what they've said to you. But uh, that's to protect people against their own family members who come in there, and maybe the old man or old woman is worth a lot of money, and the family members will come in there and try to take their money, or staff will know they're worth a lot of money and trick them out of their money, uh, taking advantage of them. And sometimes people are delusional in those facilities and they might say things like that. As an ombudsman, you can investigate that and see what's going on, what the facility is doing about it, if any. It may just be that they investigated it, felt it was the person was imagining it. Um, our neighbor across the street was 100 years old, celebrated her 100th birthday, actually 99th birthday. She ended up in the nursing home at 100. But she was saying the reason they put her in nursing home because she was saying that people were coming in and taking advantage of her. And I guess what they thought was they didn't know if it was true or not. Their caretakers were taking advantage of her, but because she had people that came into her home. So they didn't know if it was true, but they thought the best way to protect her would be to put her in a facility where I think there's probably other factors too we didn't know about, but that's just an example. The ombudsman program is really cool, and if we get a chance, I may actually contact them to see if they'll come and talk to this class as well as my techniques and other classes. Anyway, hope you have a good week. Thank you for being patient with me as I stumble through this.